Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Listen, I hope each and every one of you had a happy Thanksgiving for those that do celebrate Thanksgiving here in the United States. It was a great opportunity for myself to travel back home, hang out with some family and friends and loved ones, and eat a lot of food. And I know some of you here may still have some leftovers. As a reminder, I'm certainly not a health expert, I'm only a meteorologist, but you want to be careful with that because some food does expire after even just a few days. Some folks that I know, not within the walls of Energy Rogue, but friends of mine outside of this space, they keep leftovers from Thanksgiving on the order of a few to several weeks. Don't be that person, okay? Don't do that. It's very bad. That's my daily advice for today. But it is Tuesday, and this is the time where we do put together weather videos and discussions for the United States. But this couldn't come at a better time, because a lot of the discussion that I've seen both in the Energy Rogue server as well as even outside of Energy Rogue has been about this turn of events with winter. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden, as we head out towards December 11th to the 17th, for example, we are forecasting a pretty moderate to high probability of above normal temperatures for pretty much everywhere in the United States. And this is something that I hinted at several days ago. I mentioned, hey, we could enter into a bit of a reprieve with some of these colder temperatures, but don't let it fool you. Well, we're going to talk about that tonight because, to be quite honest, I think a lot of people in the nat gas energy space are getting faked out by this mild temperature regime. But we're going to talk about why here throughout tonight's video. But I just want to stress one thing as a foreshadow. When we talk about this season, we cannot correlate it to last year. Remember that last year we had a good 2 weeks of winter, late December into early January, and then that was it. We were done. We have a much different circumstance here, right? In that what I'm not going to show you, but what I will tell you now, is we have a really strong snowpack throughout the Canadian provinces, the Rockies, as well as the Northeast. Hell, we have seen substantial lake effect snow across places like Buffalo, Erie, Pennsylvania, Grand Rapids, just to name a few. Winter is certainly here. And so last year was very different. Number one, we were in an El Nino. And we're in a relatively strong El Nino, which tends to favor a much more milder temperature regime across a large swath of the United States. But this time we're in La Nina. And for those of you that are saying, well, Brendan, we were in La Nina even before that, and it was still mild. This is a different case because we're already seeing winter play out. We're already seeing throughout what was the end of November into December, those colder air regimes making their way down into areas we would expect in a typical La Nina, which is the lower Great Lakes and the northern United States. These, by the way, are two regions that I continue to harp on for having the worst of winter this season. That is my forecast, and I have not changed that forecast. And believe me, I'm certainly not somebody that's just digging my heels just to be right. Why I say that is derived from both what we're observing, again, snowpack, ice coverage, and the current pattern that we're in, along with what we're forecasting forward thinking. All three of those components is why I have not changed my forecast as it relates to the United States. Now, am I teetering on the thought of maybe changing my outlook for, say, late February, March? Yes, absolutely. It's something that I am thinking about. I'm not certainly going to announce that and project it because it does require more research. But what I will say is December and January and into February, I am still forecasting for those areas in black, again, Midwest, Northeast, Upper Midwest, to be the worst of winter, seeing more instances of below normal temperatures as well as snowfall periodically, which we've already seen both happen. All right, so we're going to dive into it. We're going to jump into it right now and just, I don't know how to even transition to that other than saying let's just dive into it, right? So these three maps I want to turn your attention to. These are issued by NOAA, and these are temperature probability forecasts. Now, if you've been paying attention to WX Rogue, you've seen that this orange that you're observing across the United States, this isn't something that we were even showing on these maps. And when I mean us, I mean NOAA. But now all of a sudden we see it. So we got to keep in mind one thing, right? Even though we're seeing these mild temperature forecasts showing up, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to experience that the rest of the way. There is going to be breaks in the action. And this break is really between, call it the 11th through the 17th. I think that's a pretty reasonable time frame issued by NOAA. And so if we conceptualize this by looking at some of these charts, right? Let's take a look first at population-weighted heating degree days. This clearly shows a brief uptrend, what we've already seen as heightened heating degree days, and this is total, by the way, before we then see a dramatic drop between the 9th and the 12th of December, and then a subtle increase and a decrease. This bit of reprieve here in these heating degree days, of course, is a dramatic drop-off from what we saw to round out the beginning of December. But this does not capture the season that I'm forecasting. That's why I go back to my point just moments ago. To a lot of folks in the nat gas energy space, this drop in HCD, I think there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions saying, all right, we're mild, that's it, winter's over. I completely 100% disagree with that sentiment. So we've seen the charts. We didn't look at the observed, but take it with a grain of salt, and not even take it with a grain of salt. Take my word for it that we are seeing a above normal snowpack across the Canadian provinces, which in turn leads to colder temperatures as you increase your latitude northward. If we look here at the CFS, I want to turn your attention to this. The CFS, this model, this climate model, goes all the way out a month. I think it's about 700 plus hours. Let me just see here. 700, yeah, like almost 800 hours. So we're talking about a few weeks here, and really several weeks for that matter. And granted, I want to just be careful by saying that this is just one model, but what it does is it captures the forward thinking that even I have, which is that we are not done with winter. And not just that, we haven't even seen the coldest of winter yet, especially for the lower Great Lakes. So let's take this through. This is a map of the 850 millibar temperature. I promised you we weren't going to be talking about jet stream, but what I want you to think about here is when we're looking at 850 millibars, we're talking about a kilometer off the surface. So whether you work in the metric system or you work in the English system, right, of measurements, either way you derive this, this is not far off the ground. So these temperatures, about plus or minus 5-ish degrees Celsius or so, that's really the only difference. Otherwise, at the surface, barring any sort of temperature inversions or anything meteorologically sound, this is a relatively good representation of cold trends or pattern trends. So this takes us to today. If we forward this in time, and I'm actually just going to go play this out as is, you see that as we get to the 11th, right, we're still seeing these cold punches through the northeast, but look what continues to build here, right? Let's pause right there. So yes, clearly we see as we get towards the 10th, there's that next cold punch that moves through. We get a little bit more mild for a bit between that 11th to the 17th time frame. This takes us, by the way, to December the 15th. And you do see here, let's actually go back. You do see what would be an area of high pressure that builds. I don't know why that highlighter's on. Let's try this. There we go. You see this high pressure out towards the Gulf. And of course, high pressure spins clockwise in the northern hemisphere. That helps to bring up that warm Gulf moisture, which is cooling off, by the way. But still, it brings some of that milder temperature regime up towards the Midwest, the upper Midwest, and even the south central U.S. Meanwhile, during that span, though, we still have cold air trailing behind in the northeast New England. So we got to be mindful of that. Just because we're seeing some milder temperatures in one part of the country doesn't mean another area isn't getting the cold and feeling it. But this takes us to the 15th of December. We see another cold snap behind that, albeit not as strong, but still cold air advection, especially for the lower Great Lakes. As that moves off, you get another punch, this time out for the Northeast in New England. Once again, high pressure returns out in the Gulf, brings a little bit of some milder conditions. But then as we continue to go forward, there's another cold punch. That's actually one of our strongest ones that would be forecasted for the 25th, towards the end of the month. You see a secondary lobe, this one being one of the stronger ones we've seen, or what would be. That would be out towards the 28th of December. And you see this continuing sort of oscillation of that cold air, which is not something that we saw last year. We weren't seeing this revolving door of cold air punches following each other. As a matter of fact, more of this milder temperature regime is what we saw throughout much of the season. And that was even expanded all the way up towards the Northeast New England. But the other thing I want to point your attention to is up here near the poles. This white you see here, we're talking about really cold temperatures on the order of, negative 26 to, negative 30 degrees Celsius, right? And why that's important is because that cold air is really strong. And that is derived from both our Enzo, which is our La Nina. It's derived from our strong snowpack up north. Our ice cover is very healthy. And subsequently to that, why that's important is because that drives your cold air in the poles. And if we have colder temperatures up north, at any time, that can spill down. Now, one thing I want to mention with the CFS, what's driving this mild temperature regime is a more muted high pressure out in the Pacific. Rather than having this cold air being displaced further south, this high pressure is not as ample. And because of that, a lot of the cold air remains trapped up in the poles, and especially towards the Canadian provinces. But that's assuming that high pressure remains static. And I don't buy that. And what concerns me is that as this cold air continues to remain trapped, all we need is just a stratospheric warming event or this ridge to become more ample again, or this area of high pressure, right? And there's our high pressure here, to then displace that south. In other words, many people would call that an Arctic invasion. So what am I saying here? Let's sort of summarize and wrap this up in a bow. The CFS model is certainly not a silver bullet, but it is a good indicator on trends, in that we can go very far out and we can see from this solution what type of pattern we're forecasting. What is the trend as we head towards the latter end of December into early January? I think a lot of folks in this space look at a map like this and are probably drawing the same conclusions as many, which is, well, there's quite a bit of mild temperature showing up all of a sudden. Looks like winter's done, it's canceled, and everybody's saying that we were going to see winter is wrong. And I would beg to differ. Because, like I said, this model is certainly not a silver bullet, number one. Number two, we are assuming that we are not going to see ample high pressure displace cold air south. And as a matter of fact, even if this model was correct, it still goes back to my original point that we have a crap ton of cold air that continues to build and congeal. All it's going to take is for this to eventually break out, become more amplified, and then all of this cold air spills south. And then we're talking about a major Arctic blast scenario that impacts not just the Midwest and the Northeast, but a large swath of the country. So a lot of that concerns me. And I don't see anything in my eyes that makes me think, well, I don't know, this prediction's kind of shaky. I'm still sticking to my guns on that, and that this forecast, my prediction for this winter season, still does call for below normal temperatures across the northern United States, especially for the Midwest and the Northeast. Where we'll continue to see, though, above normal temperatures and more mild is the south central United States, both of which have played out quite nicely. But my prediction has not changed in that we are likely to see that continue throughout the month of January and even getting into the beginning of February. If you have any questions on anything we talked about tonight, post that down in the Discord below. I'm more than willing to answer your questions, and especially for those folks who are new subscribers to Energy Rogue, welcome. It's great to have you here. Don't be shy. Post those questions about anything relating to the weather trends moving forward, and I'll be happy to answer those in a little bit more detail. Thank you so much for tuning in as always, and we will see